We're close to getting some answers. The governor says we'll know within days just how much social distancing will be needed in the months to come. And the governor has a direct and emotional response to the critics comparing his stay-home order to the genocide of millions of people. 800 people wanted to come to a Coloradan's funeral. They were only supposed to have 10. A survivor story. Relatively young, healthy, he ended up on a ventilator. Now he's able to share his experience. The wonky reason that Colorado's unemployment system is still a mess. Let's hear it for the mechanics. Who knows where we'd be stranded without them? And you have some questions about my colleague's grow operation. We have the answers next. If there are no objections, we will start with encouraging news tonight. Hearing none, I can tell you that more than 500 Coloradans were released from the hospital on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, headed home as they continue their successful recoveries from COVID-19. Hospital release numbers dropped for the very first time this afternoon. One of those survival stories belongs to a relatively young man, 44 years old, healthy, and he ended up on a ventilator. His doctors told him that our social distancing is one of the reasons that there was a ventilator there to save his life. Here's Anusha Roy.
The downward spiral started March 10th.
Pretty serious symptoms by the evening of the 10th.
4 days later, Tony Fierro went to an urgent care.
And they directed me immediately to an emergency room. They diagnosed me with pneumonia, prescribed me a Z-Pack, and told me to get some rest and quarantine myself.
By March 18th, he was back.
Should go home and self-quarantine and quote-unquote make it a Netflix weekend.
3 days later,
I was basically suffocating at home.
Tony ended up at Denver Health under the care of Dr. Hollis, and doctors knew he had COVID-19.
I made the decision that now's the time where Tony really needs to go to the ICU because it looks like he's going to need to be put on a ventilator.
Tony is married, a father of 2.
He couldn't speak in a full sentence at all. He really looks scared.
I was very grateful that Denver Health had a vent ready for me.
We're not at the point where we have to make really difficult decisions as to who gets a ventilator and who doesn't get a ventilator.
And that's because many people have been social distancing, which Dr. Hollis says has helped with their patient load. Patients who are fighting a ferocious virus.
They can't have their family come see them
by themselves.
And even when we do go into the room, we're covered head to toe in PPE. So, despite caring for Tony for 5-6 days, Tony's never seen my face.
For 5 days, Tony was on a ventilator in a room that was actually for orthopedic surgery patients, but transformed for people who needed critical care at a critical time.
Not everybody that goes on a vent comes off of one as quickly or as healthy as I did.
April 4th, doctors said Tony was ready to come home.
44 years old and in excellent shape, and it took me down.
So Tony wanted to share his story because he wanted to encourage people to keep social distancing. And the other part that played such a critical role in him getting better was the fact that Denver Health has been expanding the number of ICU beds they have. Usually they have about 47 for adults. So far they have doubled that. And Kyle, they're ready to go as high as 153 if they see a surge of patients.
And I know that there's a certain subset of the population that thinks, well, I want to get this because I'm just going to power through it and then I'll have my immunity and it's back to life. But we really don't know what the prognosis looks like for folks like him long term.
Yeah, exactly. And doctors said that is definitely something they're keeping an eye on. But at this point, the virus is so new, they simply don't know the answer to that. But Tony knows for him that he's got weeks of recovery left. I mean, he's been home for almost a week and a half now. He still gets winded going up the stairs in the beginning. It was hard for him to even have enough energy to just brush his own teeth. So it's going to be weeks before he is completely back to normal, Kyle.
All right. Anusha Roy, thanks for that conversation with Tony. Appreciate it. Colorado's beef production continues to drop with the closure of the JPS plant in Greeley while they clean that facility. And Cargill now scaling back shifts in output from its Fort Morgan meatpacking facility. A Cargill executive was here on Next yesterday about the same time that public health officials were touring the plant. He told us that if they couldn't run it safely, they wouldn't run it at all. A Teamsters leader tells me that 150 workers are quarantined there. 7 have tested positive for the virus, and 1 person at the Fort Morgan facility has died. Saul Longoria Sanchez was a loving and encouraging husband and father, but hardworking. That's what his family says most of all. You would have to be to put in 30 years in a meatpacking plant. Today, his family said goodbye. Saul Longoria Sanchez kept working at the JBS plant in Greeley during the pandemic because his work with the food supply was considered essential, and his family says that he trusted his longtime employer to keep him safe. He died of COVID-19 a week ago yesterday. State health records indicate that he is one of 4 JBS employees to die of COVID-19. His coworkers remembered him today as they maintained their distance from each other.
Unfortunately, due to the COVID virus, they allow 10 people for the viewing. There's 6 kids of us, 13 grandkids, and my mom. So they've done an exception for 12 people. So that's the kids, our spouses, and my mom. And then after that, directly after the viewing, they're going to go ahead and just do the burial. We have only very, very close family, and we've asked them if they can drive by, you know, have a moment of silence and then keep going. That would be great. But we had so many people. I think at least 872 people wanted to attend that funeral, and we had to say no.
Saul Longoria Sanchez was 78 years old. We honor his memory by continuing to do the difficult things necessary to keep other Coloradans safe. Governor Jared Polis says we will know within days what of the social distancing is working and, most importantly, how much social distancing will be needed in the months to come. Phase 2 today is how he described that next period. That came out in a briefing that was short on specifics but did have one strikingly emotional moment. It was an entirely typical Governor Polis press conference. He outlined some new statistics, went through some PowerPoint slides, droned on a bit about the details, sidestepped a few reporter questions, until the moment he was asked about the rhetoric being used by his critics. We told you about State Senator Jerry Sonnenberg calling Polis's Colorado a police state, worse than communism, how Republican House Leader Patrick Neville linked stay-home orders to the mentality of the Nazi police. Governor Polis was asked to respond to ugliness like that, and the governor showed emotion we rarely see.
As a Jewish American who lost family in the Holocaust, I'm offended by any comparison to Nazism. We act to save lives, the exact opposite of the slaughter of 6 billion Jews and many gypsies and Catholics and gays and lesbians and Russians and so many others. You're not, by not staying at home, by having parties, by congregating, you're not sticking it to the government, you're not sticking it to Jared Polis, you're sticking it to yourself. Because you're putting yourself and your loved ones in jeopardy, and you're prolonging the economic pain and difficulties that your fellow Coloradans face.
There is a common sense argument for lifting Colorado's social distancing guidelines, perhaps for doing it even more quickly than the governor wants. And we need to hear that argument. But right now, it is being drowned out by the Republican state legislators who are likening Governor Polis's stay-home order to the tactics of the Nazis. They go on the radio and say that it leads to a Gestapo-like mentality. They write op-eds saying it's a police state that's worse than communism. They send out fundraising letters talking about the Polis police state. They do this because they know it raises the 2 things that they need most: anger and money. Meanwhile, most of Colorado is having a common sense, good faith discussion about how we reopen our state as quickly as possible. And at this point, I don't see how the elected officials who are ranting about communism and Nazis have anything to contribute. Latest update is that 357 Coloradans have died of COVID-19. 1,600 some were hospitalized. Remember, though, 500 plus just got out of the hospital in the last 3 days. New number today. And Colorado has more than 8,200 confirmed cases after testing 40,000 people. Aurora is going to furlough city employees following the path set by Boulder and Broomfield. 500 part-time and seasonal workers in Aurora were told that they need to stay home without pay. So every city is learning to do with less revenue. Not all are announcing furloughs, though. Our Marshall Zellinger looks at different plans of how cities plan to keep citying.
Rec centers are closed, city parking lots empty. Lighter traffic means fewer people and fewer dollars being spent. Money used for plowing, paving, and running the city. In Boulder, the city estimates being down 10%, $28 million in missing sales tax money, which is the same amount the city has in its piggy bank.
The reserve fund is also there for natural disasters such as wildfires and floods, and we may end up experiencing those disasters on top of this one.
Before dipping into the reserves at all, the city first initiated a hiring freeze, then asked departments to cut expenses 5 to 10%. And starting Monday, the city will furlough 737 employees for 10 weeks. That will save Boulder $2.8 of the $28 million.
Part of it is that we have people who are at home not able to work at all. And so there's a philosophical question about, do you pay people out of tax revenues to be at home not working?
We're seeing an impact of about 12% loss of revenue.
The city of Denver's damage, $180 million, most of that from sales and use tax. Denver has a reserve of $261 million and might use $30 million of that. The city plans to reduce spending, things like travel and buying new vehicles, and having each department identify 7.5% worth of cuts.
We go through a deliberative process. We don't just cut across the board. We want to make a thoughtful, informed decision based off of feedback that we receive from them. So that is our starting point.
Furloughs are not yet being discussed in Denver or Englewood, where the budget is down just 3%, or $1.6 million.
We don't have the number of hotels that a city like Denver and even Littleton have, quite honestly. So that is a significant loss for those municipalities.
Englewood has just shy of $19 million in reserves, but isn't touching it yet. So far, the city has cut back on travel, training, and delayed hiring for vacant positions.
Our plan as a city is to offset those shortfalls with reduced operating expenses to the extent that we can.
The 10-week furloughs for Boulder and Broomfield employees begins this weekend, on Monday, I should say, and then the furloughs for Aurora take effect a week from Saturday. I asked representatives from each of the cities, Kyle, if before asking employees to take a 100% pay cut, did any employees suggest partial pay cuts across the board? The answer was no.
A lot of difficult decisions being made, and one of the toughest parts is that cities don't know how this is going to come out on the flip side. We don't know how soon we'll be there. All right, Marshall, thank you. Colorado's essential employees couldn't get where they need to go without them. Our statewide shout-out series continues. And how about a story totally unrelated to coronavirus? A stone dug out of a backyard garden has next solving a mystery. May I make a recommendation, point you towards something that didn't come from us, but I think is worth your time. So Colorado's unemployment system right now is an excrement sandwich. We hear from you about your frustrations on that daily. There's an article on The Verge that explains why. So Colorado's unemployment website is written in this decades-old coding language called COBOL. So old that few coders know how to work with it. Colorado had one coder who knew how to work with it. So that explains why it's been so laborious to get the federal guidelines, like for self-employed workers and gig workers, updated in the state's online code. We have a link to that article from The Verge on the next Facebook page. To all of those keeping critical vehicles running for essential workers during the pandemic, Colorado appreciates you. Lisa says, we never really hear about the mechanics who keep the people like the police and the EMTs and the utility workers running. Her husband's a mechanic working every day to keep essential people and their vehicles rolling. So who do you think deserves the next shout out for keeping Colorado in operation during the outbreak? Text me your suggestions, 303-871-1491, and we'll give them a statewide shout out.
sunshine today, temperatures in the 50s, now mostly cloudy skies, rain this evening, changing to all snow overnight. Our temperature at 54 was cooler than the average of 61, but tomorrow our highs will be half that number. The storm approaching from the northwest, combining forces with cold Arctic air, and we'll see about 2 to 5 inches of snow in Denver tonight through midday tomorrow. The storm's a fast mover. It's out of here by Thursday evening. 2 to 5 in Denver, heavier amounts in the foothills. So for the city tonight, we go into that winter storm advisory at 10 p.m. It expires at 6 p.m. on Thursday. A cold Thursday high of 31, but clearing and cool for Friday with temperatures back in the 60s for Sunday and Monday, and the chance of a few spring-like rain showers early next week.
They were digging in a garden in Boulder County when they hit a stone.
When I flipped it over, it was a grave marker with a gentleman's name on it, a World War II vet.
Needless to say, they stopped digging. Don't worry, he's not in the garden. But where is he? That's next. How are you using your extra time around the house? Dustin Boyd thought that he would dig out the old garden until he hit the tombstone. And he reached out to our Steve Steger, as one does when they find a tombstone.
I really wanted to do the Kyle Clark living room that's on my computer.
You got to make the best out of these strange times. Dustin Boyd is using them to get some housework done.
So we started sort of demoing the backyard.
Digging out rocks.
These are all the rocks we pulled out of this corner.
He found one that didn't match.
And when I flipped it over, it was a grave marker with a gentleman's name on it, a World War II vet.
Alexander Shaw, U.S. Navy, World War II, gone since January 1986. Dustin didn't know what to think.
I'd hate to think that, this veteran's tombstone was for some reason in our backyard and, the family was never able to buy another one. I mean, who knows, right?
The good news here, that doesn't appear to be the case.
Mr. Shaw is actually buried at Green Mountain Cemetery next to his wife.
Kim Bridges owns the Boulder Cemetery and directed us to the spot where we found a carbon copy of the stone. Alexander Shaw, buried next to his wife, Iona. Bridges isn't exactly sure why a similar marker is in Dustin's backyard, but she has a guess.
The VA is very particular about how they honor our veterans, and a marker will come to the cemetery for the veteran's burial, and it could be damaged. And that is probably what happens to this one.
Perhaps that's the case.
Sure, but you can see how it's chipped on the front there.
Boyd isn't sure what he'll do with it. And since we couldn't find any family in our search, he's hoping you might know the Shaws.
I just hate to think that this thing was here and we've got it and somebody might want it.
In the meantime, he'll keep digging, both literally and figuratively. For Next, I'm Steve Steger.
Found by the right guy. He actually cares about what happens to it. We return here with one of your most pressing questions, and for once, it's not about the stupid wood over the fireplace. That and your feedback next. We're getting some feedback tonight about Steve Steger's grow operation, the weed or plant or flower or whatever it is behind him in the live reports from Steve's house. Viewers keep writing in to ask what's going on. Steve has even heard from a botanist who was intrigued by this specimen. Must be an epic piece of vegetation. Steve?
The plant came into our home, like so many of them do, through the front door after my fiance bought it at the store, Target to be exact. And it's survived sitting on our shelf ever since, for about a year, because it's fake. Sitting there until it needed a change, when my boss thought the wall behind me was too bland. So I put it on a stool in the spare bedroom, where it barely gets any light. But that doesn't matter, because again, it's fake.
It's a really good-looking plant. It's very lush. You can understand why people would be intrigued. I wonder if the botanist is kind of, I don't know, feeling silly that he wrote in about it. Anyway, whatever. Okay, your feedback. Number of you wrote in who understand programming language to correct my mispronunciation of the archaic coding language in the Colorado unemployment website. Ed, among others, says it's COBOL. COBOL is how you say that old programming language. If you know how to use it, maybe go to Help Colorado Now. and offer to help the state with it. Lana says, I want Colorado to reopen safely as opposed to quickly. Lana, I bet we can do both. Let's get the smart people in a room. See you next time.